The heavy metal gates of Riverside Women's Correctional Facility clanged shut behind me for the last time. I stood on the cracked sidewalk, clutching a small plastic bag that contained everything I owned after 2 years and 3 months in prison. The morning air was cold against my face, but I barely felt it. All I could think about was the piece of paper folded in my pocket with an address written in my own careful handwriting. Brenda's address. At 68 years old, I had never imagined I would be walking out of prison. 2 years ago, I was Dorothy Mitchell, respected former school principal, beloved grandmother, pillar of the community. Now I was inmate number 4C291, a convicted felon with a record that would follow me for the rest of my life. But I wasn't broken. If anything, prison had made me stronger, sharper, more determined than I had ever been in my life. Every single day for the past 730 days, I had been planning for this moment. I walked slowly down the street, my legs still adjusting to the freedom of movement after so long in confined spaces. The world looked different somehow, brighter, louder, more chaotic than I remembered. Cars rushed past me, people hurried by without making eye contact, and the smell of exhaust and fast food filled the air. A taxi pulled up to the curb when I raised my hand. The driver, a middle-aged man with kind eyes, looked at me with curiosity but didn't ask questions. He had probably picked up plenty of people from the prison over the years. "Where to?" he asked. I gave him the address of a storage facility on the other side of town. During my trial, before everything fell apart, I had rented a small storage unit and hidden something there, something that Brenda didn't know existed. Something that would change everything. The ride took 20 minutes through neighborhoods I barely recognized. So much had changed while I was locked away. New buildings, new businesses, new faces everywhere. But my determination hadn't changed. If anything, it had grown stronger with each passing day. The storage facility was exactly as I remembered it. Rows of metal buildings with orange doors surrounded by a chain-link fence. I paid the taxi driver and walked to Unit 47, pulling out a key I had kept hidden in my shoe for over 2 years. Inside the small, dusty space was a single cardboard box. I had packed it carefully the night before my sentencing, when I still had hope that the truth would come out during my appeal. When that hope died, the box became something else. It became my weapon. I opened it with trembling hands. Inside were documents, photographs, bank statements, and a small digital recorder that I had used to document my suspicions about Brenda before everything went wrong. At the time, I thought I was being paranoid. Now I knew I had been gathering evidence. There were copies of financial records showing money missing from Kevin's accounts, photos I had taken of expensive items in Brenda's possession that she claimed she couldn't afford, screenshots of social media posts that contradicted her stories about where she had been and what she was doing. But most importantly, there was a letter I had found hidden in Brenda's purse one day when she asked me to get her phone charger. A letter from someone named Tony, talking about their plans to leave town together once the old lady problem was solved. I had been the old lady problem. At the bottom of the box was a small notebook where I had written down every inconsistency in Brenda's stories, every lie she had told, every manipulation I had witnessed. I had started keeping the notebook months before my arrest, when something in my gut told me that my daughter-in-law wasn't who she pretended to be. I closed the box and called another taxi. This time, I gave the driver Brenda's current address. I had learned it from another inmate whose sister worked at the post office. Information was currency in prison, and I had spent 2 years learning how to gather it. The apartment building was nicer than I expected. A modern complex with a doorman and expensive cars in the parking lot. Clearly, Brenda had been living well while I rotted in prison for crimes I didn't commit. I walked through the lobby like I belonged there, my head held high despite my prison-issued clothes and worn shoes. The doorman barely glanced at me as I headed for the elevator. Apartment 12B. I had memorized the number months ago. I stood outside her door for a full minute, listening to the sounds coming from inside. A television was on, and I could hear someone moving around. My heart was pounding, but not from fear. from anticipation. For 2 years, Brenda had tried to visit me in prison. Every single month, like clockwork, she would show up during visiting hours with tears in her eyes and concern in her voice. She would tell the guards that she was worried about me, that she wanted to help me, that she still loved me despite what I had done. Every single month I refused to see her. The guards thought I was being stubborn, maybe even cruel. They couldn't understand why I wouldn't want to see the one family member who still cared about me. Kevin had stopped visiting after the first month, too hurt and confused by my betrayal to face me. But I knew something they didn't know. I knew that Brenda's visits weren't about love or concern. They were about making sure I stayed broken, making sure I never figured out what she had really done to me. She had underestimated me. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the box cutter I had taken from the storage facility, not as a weapon, but as a tool. I was going to need it to open the envelope I had prepared, the envelope containing copies of everything I had discovered about Brenda's real life. I took a deep breath and knocked on the door. Footsteps approached from the other side, and I heard the security chain being moved. The door opened, and there she was. Brenda Mitchell, my son's wife, the woman who had destroyed my life and sent me to prison for crimes she had committed. She looked exactly the same as she had 2 years ago. Blonde hair, perfectly styled, makeup flawlessly applied, wearing clothes that cost more than most people made in a month. But when she saw me standing in her doorway, her face went completely white. "Hello, Brenda," I said calmly. "We need to talk." She tried to close the door, but I put my foot in the way. "I don't think so. You've been trying to visit me for 2 years. Well, now I'm visiting you. Dorothy, I don't understand. How did you find me? What are you doing here?" I smiled, and I could see the fear growing in her eyes. "I'm here to do what I've been planning for the past 730 days. I'm here to get my life back." I pushed past her into the apartment, and she stumbled backward, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. The apartment was beautiful, filled with expensive furniture and artwork, all paid for with money she had stolen from my son while I sat in a prison cell. "You can't be here," she whispered. "This is breaking and entering. I'll call the police." I laughed, a sound that surprised even me. "Go ahead, call them. I have some very interesting things to show them when they get here." I set my box down on her expensive coffee table and opened it slowly, watching her face as she realized what she was looking at. The color drained from her cheeks as she recognized the documents, the photographs, the evidence I had been collecting. "You see, Brenda," I said, pulling out the letter from Tony. "I may have spent 2 years in prison, but I wasn't wasting my time. I was learning, I was planning, and most importantly, I was remembering everything you thought I had forgotten." She sank into a chair, her hands shaking. "Dorothy, please, you don't understand. It's not what you think." "Oh, but it is exactly what I think," I replied, my voice steady and calm. "And now you're going to tell me everything. You're going to confess to what you really did. And then you're going to help me get my life back." I reached into the box and pulled out the digital recorder, the same one I had used years ago to document my suspicions. "Because if you don't, I'm going to destroy you the same way you destroyed me, except I'm going to do it with the truth." Brenda stared at the recorder in my hands, and I could see the exact moment when she realized that her perfect plan had fallen apart. The moment when she understood that the old lady she had sent to prison had become someone much more dangerous than she had ever imagined. Before Brenda became the woman who smiled while I went to prison, she was the woman who carried my grocery bags and called me Mom in the sweetest voice. That is what still makes my stomach twist when I think back. 3 years before my arrest, my son Kevin brought Brenda to Sunday dinner. Kevin was 42 then, a careful man who liked neat spreadsheets, clean shoes and calm plans. After my husband passed, Kevin checked on me often. He worried I would be lonely in the big house. I told him I was fine, but a mother always hears the quiet parts her child doesn't say. When Kevin met Brenda, I saw a new light in him. He laughed more. He stood straighter. He talked about the future, again. That mattered to me. Brenda arrived in a pale yellow dress and a polite smile. She brought flowers, not the cheap kind either. She hugged me like we were already family and said, "Mrs. Mitchell, I've heard so much about you." "Call me Dorothy," I told her. She acted shy in a way that seemed harmless. She complimented my cooking. She asked about my teaching days and listened like it was the most interesting thing in the world. When Kevin went to refill our drinks, she leaned closer and whispered, "He's a good man. I'm lucky." I remember thinking, please let this be true. In the months after they married, Brenda became part of my life in small, careful steps. She came with Kevin to bring me soup when I caught a cold. She offered to help me set up my phone when I couldn't figure out the new updates. She sent me pictures of their dog. She baked cookies at Christmas, slightly burnt at the edges, and laughed at herself in a cute way. Then the little strange things began. The first time, I didn't even call it strange. Brenda mentioned she was tight on money because real estate was slow. But the next week she showed up with a designer handbag. It was the kind you see behind glass, not on regular shelves. I told myself maybe it was a gift from Kevin. But later, Kevin complained about work being stressful because he was trying to clean up some missing funds from their joint account. He said it like it was just a headache, not a warning sign. Kevin trusted people, especially Brenda. "Probably just a bank glitch," he said. A week after that, Brenda called me crying. I can still hear it. The shaky breath, the hiccuping sobs, the way she said my name like I was the only safe person in the world. "Dorothy, I messed up," she whispered. "Please don't hate me." I was folding laundry at the time. I sat right down on the couch because something in her voice made my bones feel cold. "What happened?" I asked. She told me she had a gambling problem. She said it started small, online games, little bets, then grew into something she couldn't stop. She said she had borrowed money to cover it. She said men were calling her, threatening her. She said Kevin could never know because he would leave her. "Please," she begged. "If he finds out, I'll lose him. I'll lose everything." I should have told her to confess right then. I should have called Kevin and said, "We need to talk." But I pictured Kevin's face if he learned his new wife had been lying. I pictured him broken in my kitchen, holding his head in his hands like he did at his father's funeral. I had already watched him suffer enough, so I made a choice. I told Brenda, "We'll fix this, but you tell me the truth and you stop. No more secrets." She promised. She swore on everything she loved. She cried harder, and I held her like she was my own child. The next day, I drove to my bank and pulled money from my savings. Money my husband and I had saved for emergencies. I handed Brenda a cashier's check and told her, "Pay it off. Close the door on this. Start over." She hugged me so tight I could barely breathe. "You're saving my life," she whispered. For a short while, she acted like a new person. She called me to say thank you. She brought me tea. She offered to help me in my garden. She even came over one afternoon with a small notebook and said she wanted to write a budget so she could do better. I wanted to believe her so badly that I ignored the warnings. But then the requests started again. Not every day, not even every week. She was smart about it. She waited until Kevin was busy or out of town. She called when she knew I was alone. "It's not gone," she'd whisper. "The men are back. They're angry. I'm scared." She sent me screenshots of messages from unknown numbers. "Pay up." "We know where you live." The words made my heart pound. I asked Kevin if he knew anything about it, but I did it carefully, like I was just making conversation. Kevin said no, and Brenda always had an explanation ready. She told me not to call the police because it would make them worse. She told me Kevin couldn't know because it would break him. She told me I was the only person who could help. So I helped. I wrote checks. I withdrew cash. I even sold a piece of jewelry my husband had given me. Each time Brenda cried and promised it was the last time. Then one afternoon I came by their house without calling first. I had made soup because Brenda said she had a stomach bug. Her car was in the driveway, but the curtains were drawn. I let myself in with the spare key Kevin had given me, calling out, "Brenda!" It's Dorothy." No answer. I walked into the living room and froze. Brenda was there, yes, but she wasn't sick. She was standing close to a man I had never seen before, too close. Her hand was on his arm in a way that made my skin prickle. They jumped apart when they saw me. Brenda's face changed so fast it almost didn't look human. In 1 second she was startled. In the next, she was smiling. "Oh, Dorothy," she said too brightly. "You scared me." The man grabbed his jacket and muttered something about leaving. Brenda laughed like it was nothing. I didn't laugh. After he left, I asked quietly, "Who was that?" Brenda sighed and leaned against the counter like she was tired of me. "A client." "A client doesn't stand that close," I said. Her eyes hardened for half a second. "You're imagining things." That was the first time I felt it. Like a door in her had closed. Like the sweet, helpful Brenda was only a mask she put on when it suited her. I went home that night and sat at my kitchen table staring at my hands. I thought about the money I'd given her. I thought about Kevin's trusting face. I thought about those threat messages. And I wondered for the first time if the real danger wasn't outside at all. It was inside our family. The next week I did something I had never done before. I started writing things down, dates, amounts, what Brenda said, what Kevin said, what didn't match. It felt silly at first, like I was turning into a suspicious old woman. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being pulled into something dark, something that could swallow all of us if I didn't pay attention. I didn't know yet that Brenda had been watching me too, and that every act of kindness I gave her was being turned into a rope she planned to use to tie my life up and drag it away. The realization that I had been completely fooled hit me like a physical blow. I sat in my kitchen that night, staring at the mortgage papers I had signed just weeks earlier, feeling like the biggest fool who had ever lived. $50,000 of my life savings, gone. My house, which Harold and I had worked 30 years to pay off, now mortgaged again because I had believed my daughter-in-law's lies. But the money wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was knowing that Kevin had no idea what kind of woman he had married. I spent the next few days in a fog, trying to figure out what to do with this information. Should I tell Kevin immediately? Should I confront Brenda first? Should I try to gather more evidence before making any accusations? My decision was made for me when Brenda called on Thursday morning, her voice bright and cheerful as if nothing had happened. "Dorothy, I have wonderful news. I was able to negotiate with those people and they've agreed to accept a smaller payment. I think I can pay you back sooner than we thought." The casual way she lied to me, even after taking $50,000, made my hands shake with anger. "That's interesting, Brenda. When do you think you might be able to start making payments?" "Oh, very soon. Maybe next month. I'm getting a bonus at work, and things are really looking up." After I hung up, I made a decision. I was going to find out exactly what Brenda was doing with my money, and then I was going to expose her for what she really was. I started by driving past the restaurant where I had seen her with the mystery man. I felt ridiculous, like some kind of amateur detective, but I needed to know the truth. On my third visit, I saw them again. This time, I was prepared with my phone camera. The man was tall and well-dressed, probably in his 40s, with dark hair and an expensive watch. They were clearly intimate, touching each other constantly and sharing private jokes. I took several photos of them together, my heart breaking for Kevin with every shot. Next, I decided to follow Brenda after one of her supposed work meetings. She had told Kevin she would be showing houses all afternoon, but instead, she drove to an upscale shopping centre and spent 3 hours buying clothes, jewellery, and expensive cosmetics. I watched her pay with cash, my cash, and load shopping bags worth thousands of dollars into her car. The evidence was mounting, but I needed more. I needed to understand the full scope of what she was doing. My opportunity came the following week when Kevin asked me to water their plants while they went away for the weekend. Brenda had told him it was a work retreat, but I suspected it was actually a romantic getaway with her boyfriend. I let myself into their apartment with the spare key Kevin had given me, intending to just water the plants and leave. But as I was filling the watering can in the kitchen, I noticed Brenda's purse sitting on the counter. She must have forgotten it in her rush to leave. I knew I shouldn't look through her personal belongings, but the memory of my mortgaged house and empty savings account overrode my sense of privacy. Inside her purse, I found things that made my blood run cold. There was a credit card in Kevin's name that I was sure he didn't know about. The most recent statement showed charges for expensive restaurants, hotels, and jewelry stores, all places Kevin would never go. The total balance was over $15,000. I also found a second cell phone, one I had never seen before. When I turned it on, it was full of text messages between Brenda and someone named Tony. The messages were intimate and romantic, but they were also about money and plans. One message from Tony, sent just 2 days earlier, made me feel sick. "How much more can you get from the old lady? We need at least another $20,000 before we can make our move." Brenda's response, "Working on it. She's already mortgaged her house for me. I think I can get more by telling her the debt collectors found Kevin's workplace." Another message from Tony. "What about the husband? When are you going to dump him?" Brenda. "Soon. Once I clean out his accounts completely. The old lady problem needs to be solved first, though. She's getting suspicious." I was the old lady problem. I took photos of every message, every credit card statement, every piece of evidence I could find. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone steady, but I forced myself to document everything. In a small notebook tucked behind her credit cards, I found something even more disturbing. It was a list of names and amounts, like some kind of accounting ledger. I recognized some of the names as elderly people from our neighborhood. Mrs. Patterson from down the street, Mr. Gonzalez from the corner house, Mrs. Chen from the apartment complex nearby. Next to each name was a dollar amount and a brief note. Mrs. Patterson, $8,000, grandson's medical bills. Mr. Gonzalez, $12,000, roof repair scam. Mrs. Chen, $5,000, fake charity donation. Brenda wasn't just scamming me. She was running cons on elderly people all over the neighborhood, using different stories and different fake emergencies to steal their money. I felt sick as I realized the scope of what she was doing. How many other families had she destroyed? How many other people had lost their life savings to her lies? I put everything back exactly as I found it and left the apartment, my mind racing with what I had discovered. I had enough evidence to expose Brenda completely, but I needed to be smart about how I handled it. That night, I called Kevin and asked him to come over for dinner the next evening. I planned to show him everything, the photos, the messages, the credit card statements. It would break his heart, but he needed to know the truth about the woman he had married. But Brenda was smarter than I gave her credit for. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of someone pounding on my front door. When I opened it, I found 2 police officers standing on my porch, their expressions serious and official. "Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell?" one of them asked. "Yes, that's me." "Ma'am, we need to ask you some questions about some financial irregularities that have been reported in your neighborhood." My heart started pounding. "What kind of irregularities?" "We've received reports that you've been targeting elderly residents with various scams, taking money under false pretenses, forging signatures on checks, that sort of thing." I stared at them in disbelief. "That's ridiculous. I would never do such a thing." "Ma'am, we have a warrant to search your house. We're going to need you to step aside." As the officers pushed past me into my home, I saw a familiar car parked across the street. Brenda was sitting in the driver's seat, watching everything with a satisfied expression on her face. She had beaten me to the punch. The search of my house turned up things I had never seen before. In my bedroom closet, they found jewelry that belonged to Mrs. Patterson. In my kitchen drawer, they discovered forged checks with my fingerprints on them. In my home office, they found documents that made it look like I had been running elaborate scams on my neighbors for months. "Mrs. Mitchell," one of the officers said as they handcuffed me, "you're under arrest for elder fraud, theft, and forgery." As they led me to the police car, I saw Brenda get out of her car and walk toward my house. She was crying, playing the role of the concerned daughter-in-law who had discovered my crimes and felt obligated to report them. "I'm so sorry, Dorothy," she called out as they put me in the back of the police car. "I never wanted it to come to this, but I couldn't let you hurt any more people." The neighbors who had gathered to watch the spectacle looked at me with disgust and disappointment. These were people I had known for years, people who had respected me as a former school principal and community member. Now they were seeing me arrested as a common criminal. Kevin arrived just as the police car was pulling away. Through the back window, I could see Brenda running to him, throwing herself into his arms, sobbing about how sorry she was that his mother had turned out to be a thief. I tried to catch Kevin's eye, tried to communicate somehow that this was all wrong, that I was being set up. But he wouldn't look at me. The evidence was too overwhelming, and Brenda's performance was too convincing. As we drove toward the police station, I realized the full brilliance of Brenda's plan. She had been planting evidence in my house for weeks, maybe months. She had used my fingerprints on documents by having me handle papers she claimed were for Kevin. She had stolen items from neighbors and hidden them in my home. Most cleverly of all, she had used my own investigation against me. The photos I had taken of her with Tony, the evidence I had gathered of her scams, it would all look like the desperate actions of a guilty person trying to frame an innocent daughter-in-law. She had turned my attempt to expose her into proof of my own guilt. At the police station, I tried to explain what had really happened. I told them about the $50,000, about the fake gambling debts, about the messages I had found on Brenda's phone. But without the phone itself, without any way to prove my story, it just sounded like the desperate lies of a caught criminal. The detective assigned to my case, Frank Rodriguez, listened patiently but skeptically. "Mrs. Mitchell, we found stolen property in your house. We found forged documents with your fingerprints. We have multiple victims who can identify you as the person who approached them with these scams." "But I never approached anyone," I protested. "Brenda must have been using my name, or maybe she had accomplices who looked like me." Detective Rodriguez shook his head. "Ma'am, your daughter-in-law is the one who reported these crimes. She's the one who provided us with the evidence. Why would she frame you?" I tried to explain about the money, about the affair, about everything I had discovered, but it all sounded so far-fetched, so complicated compared to the simple story Brenda had told them. "Mrs. Mitchell," Detective Rodriguez said finally, "I think you need to consider accepting a plea deal. The evidence against you is overwhelming, and your daughter-in-law has been very cooperative with our investigation." That's when I knew I was trapped. Brenda had played this perfectly, and I had walked right into her web. I stared at that bracelet until my eyes burned. It was thin, gold, and pretty in a cheap way. The kind you might buy quickly, like you were buying a prop for a play. It lay in my jewelry box like a snake, quiet and waiting. I didn't touch it at first. I just stood there, hearing Brenda's last words in my head. "You might want to check your jewelry box." She had placed it there on purpose. She wanted me to find it. She wanted me to panic. And I did. But then, under the fear, something else rose up. Anger, the kind that makes you steady. I took a clean cloth from my dresser drawer and picked up the bracelet carefully so I wouldn't leave my fingerprints all over it. My heart was pounding, but my mind was clear enough to know one thing. If Brenda was planting jewelry in my house, she was already halfway through her plan. I walked into the kitchen and called Kevin. He didn't answer. I called again. Still nothing. I sent a text. "Please come over now. This is serious." No reply. That night I didn't sleep. I sat at my table with my notebook open and wrote down everything that had happened, step by step, with times and details. I even wrote down what Brenda wore, and the exact words she said. because I had learned as a principal that details matter. In the morning, I called the neighbour across the street, Mrs. Givens, who always noticed everything. I asked her if she had seen Brenda come to my house when I wasn't home. There was a pause. Then Mrs. Givens said, "Well, yes, a few times. She came by when you were out. I thought she was helping you." My stomach tightened. "Did she come inside?" "Yes. She had a key," Mrs. Givens said, "and she carried a little bag once. Looked heavy." I thanked her and hung up, my hands shaking. Brenda had a key. I hadn't given it to her. Only Kevin had one besides me. Kevin must have given it to her, thinking it was harmless. That one small, kind choice had opened my door to a liar. That afternoon, Kevin finally came by. He looked exhausted. His eyes were red, like he had not slept either. He sat down at my kitchen table and didn't meet my gaze. "I don't know what's going on," he said quietly. "Brenda says you're having episodes, that you're accusing her and forgetting things." "I'm not forgetting," I said. My voice shook, but I forced it steady. "Kevin, she is setting me up." Kevin rubbed his face. "Mom, the check. The check is fake," I cut in. "Look at it. My signature doesn't look like that. And last night she told me to check my jewelry box." I walked to my bedroom, grabbed the bracelet using the cloth again, and brought it back. I set it on the table like it was poison. "I found this," I said. "It isn't mine." Kevin stared at it. "Maybe it's yours and you forgot." The words hit me so hard I almost couldn't breathe. I leaned forward. "Kevin, listen. Do you think your mother is suddenly stealing jewelry and forging checks? Do you really think I woke up one day at 66 and decided to ruin my own life?" Kevin swallowed. "I don't know what to think." That was what Brenda wanted. Not for him to hate me right away, just for him to doubt me. Doubt makes people easy to control. "Let's go to the police," I said. "We'll tell them I think someone is planting things in my house." Kevin's eyes widened. "Mom, no. That would make you look guilty." "I'm innocent," I said sharply, "and I'm not going to act scared like I did something wrong." Kevin stood up and started pacing, just like he had the night before. "Brenda said if we go to the police, they'll start digging into everything, into our accounts, into everything." "Good," I said. "Let them dig." Kevin looked torn. "She's my wife, and I'm your mother," I said. "I'm not asking you to pick me because I'm your mother. I'm asking you to pick the truth." He didn't answer. He just stared at the bracelet. That evening, I changed my locks. It cost me money, but I didn't care. I also bought a small camera for my front porch. I wasn't good with technology, but I learned. I plugged it in and set it to record. If Brenda came again, I wanted proof. 2 days passed, then 3. On the 4th day, I came home from the grocery store and found my front door slightly open. My breath caught in my throat. I stepped inside slowly. "Hello?" I called out, even though I already knew no one would answer. The air smelled different, like someone had been inside. My living room looked the same, but I could feel it in my bones. Something had been touched. I rushed to my bedroom and opened my jewelry box. Empty. Almost everything was gone. My wedding ring, my mother's pearl earrings, my husband's old watch. Pieces that were not just things, but memories. And in the empty box, sitting on the velvet lining like a final slap, was a folded paper. I opened it with shaking hands. It was a list of names and addresses, people from my neighborhood, elderly people I knew from church and book club. Alongside each name were notes like, "Lives alone, has arthritis, cash kept in kitchen jar, trusts Dorothy." I felt sick. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about hurting others too, about making it look like I had been targeting old friends. I ran to my kitchen and grabbed my phone to call the police, but before I could dial, there was a knock at my door. A hard knock, not friendly, not like a neighbor. I opened the door and froze. 2 police officers stood there. Behind them on the sidewalk was Brenda, wrapped in a soft coat, eyes red, holding a tissue. She looked like a person who had been so brave to do the right thing. One officer said, "Dorothy Mitchell?" "Yes," I whispered. "We have some questions," he said, calm and official. "Ma'am, we received a report of theft and fraud. Multiple elderly residents claim you visited their homes and valuables went missing afterward." My legs went weak. I looked past the officers to Brenda. She wouldn't meet my eyes. She dabbed her fake tears and said softly, "Dorothy, I tried to stop this. I tried to help you. But people are getting hurt." I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab her shoulders and shake the truth out of her. Instead, I forced myself to speak. "This is a lie. Someone broke into my house. My jewelry is missing, and this," I held up the list. "This was left here." The officer glanced at the paper, then back at me. "We'll take a look inside, ma'am." "Do you have a warrant?" I asked, my voice small. He hesitated. "Ma'am, your daughter-in-law has given us consent as a resident family member." I felt my heart drop. "She doesn't live here," I said quickly. "She has no right." But the officers were already stepping inside. Brenda followed behind them, eyes lowered like she was ashamed. They searched my living room, my bedroom, my desk. One officer opened my closet. Then he said, "Ma'am, what's this?" He held up a velvet pouch. I had never seen it before. He opened it, and I watched my own life crumble. Inside were rings, earrings, necklaces, pieces that did not belong to me. Some of them I recognized from neighbors. One was Mrs. Givens's brooch, the one shaped like a tiny bird. My mouth went dry. "That's not mine," I whispered. The officer's gaze hardened. "We also have checks made out to cash, signed with your name." "I didn't sign anything," I said. "Someone is forging my signature." The officer looked toward Brenda. She stepped forward, trembling, and said in a soft voice, "I didn't want to believe it either. I thought she was just confused. But I found those items, and she begged me not to tell Kevin." My head snapped toward her. "You liar!" The officer's hand moved near his belt. "Ma'am, calm down." Brenda wiped her eyes and whispered, "I'm sorry, Dorothy. I'm so sorry." And in that moment I understood something terrifying. She wasn't sorry. She was finishing the job. The officer took a deep breath and said, "Dorothy Mitchell, you are under arrest for fraud, theft, and suspicion of elder exploitation." Cold metal cuffs closed around my wrists. I looked at Kevin's driveway, hoping he would appear, hoping he would stop this. But the street was empty. As they led me to the police car, I twisted around one last time and looked straight at Brenda. Her face was turned away from the officers. And she was smiling. The first month after my release was the loneliest time of my life. I returned to a world that had moved on without me, where everyone I had once known looked at me with suspicion and disgust. My house felt foreign and cold, filled with memories of a life that no longer existed. Kevin had changed the locks while I was in prison. When I called him to ask for my spare key back, he told me he thought it was better if we didn't have contact for a while. His voice was distant and formal, like he was talking to a stranger instead of the woman who had raised him. "I need time to process everything that happened, Mom," he said. "Maybe someday we can work things out, but right now, it's too hard." I wanted to tell him the truth, to explain that I had been framed, but I knew he wouldn't believe me. Not yet. Not without proof. The neighbors who had once been my friends now crossed the street when they saw me coming. Mrs. Patterson, whose stolen jewelry had been found in my house, glared at me with such hatred that I had to look away. Mr. Gonzalez wouldn't even acknowledge my existence. I was a pariah in my own neighborhood, a convicted felon living among the people I had supposedly victimized. But I wasn't the same woman who had gone to prison 2 years earlier. Prison had changed me, hardened me, taught me things about survival and determination that I never could have learned in my comfortable suburban life. I had work to do. My first priority was finding out where Brenda was living now. During my imprisonment, she and Kevin had moved out of their old apartment, and I had no idea where they had gone. I started by driving past Kevin's workplace, hoping to follow him home, but his schedule was unpredictable and I couldn't risk being seen. Instead, I used the techniques Carmen had taught me. I went to the public library and used their computers to search property records, voter registrations, and utility connections. It took me 3 weeks, but I finally found them. They were living in a beautiful house in an upscale neighborhood across town. The property records showed that Kevin had bought the house 6 months after my conviction, paying cash for the entire purchase price. The house was worth over $400,000. I sat in my car outside their new home, watching Kevin leave for work in an expensive new car I had never seen before. Everything about their lifestyle had improved dramatically since my imprisonment. They were living like wealthy people, not like a young couple struggling with debt. Where had all this money come from? I started following Brenda's daily routine, staying far enough back that she wouldn't notice me, but close enough to see where she went and what she did. What I discovered was fascinating and infuriating. Brenda wasn't working as a real estate agent anymore. Instead, she seemed to spend her days shopping, getting spa treatments, and meeting with various people at expensive restaurants. She drove a luxury car and wore designer clothes that cost more than most people made in a month. But most interesting of all, she was still running cons. I watched her approach elderly people at shopping centres, in parking lots, and at coffee shops. She would strike up conversations, gain their trust, and then tell them heartbreaking stories about family emergencies or financial crises. I saw her collect money from at least 6 different people over the course of 2 weeks. She was using the same techniques she had used on me, but now she was doing it systematically, like a full-time job. I started documenting everything. I took photos of her meetings with victims, recorded license plate numbers, and kept detailed notes about her activities. I was building a case piece by piece, just like Carmen had taught me, but I needed more than just evidence of her current crimes. I needed proof that she had framed me. My breakthrough came when I remembered something from the trial. The prosecutor had mentioned that some of the forged checks found in my house had been written on accounts from a bank I had never used. At the time, my lawyer hadn't followed up on this detail, but now it seemed important. I went to the bank and asked to speak with a manager about the fraudulent checks. I explained that I was the person who had been convicted of writing them, but that I believed I had been framed. The manager, a middle-aged woman named Patricia, was initially skeptical. But when I showed her my identification and explained that I had never had an account at their bank, she became more interested. These checks were written on an account that was opened 3 years ago, she said, pulling up the records on her computer. The account holder was listed as Dorothy Mitchell, but the address on file doesn't match your current address. My heart started racing. What address is on file? Patricia showed me the screen. The address was for an apartment complex I had never lived in, but I recognized the area. It was near where Brenda and Kevin had lived when they were first married. Can you show me the signature card for the account? I asked. Patricia pulled up the signature card and I immediately saw the problem. The signature looked like mine, but it wasn't quite right. Someone had practiced my signature and gotten close, but there were subtle differences that I could see. This isn't my signature, I told Patricia. Someone forged it to open this account. Patricia studied the signature more carefully. You're right, she said slowly. The handwriting is similar, but the pressure and flow are different. This looks like someone was copying your signature rather than writing naturally. She printed out copies of all the account records for me. The account had been opened by someone claiming to be me, using a fake ID and forged documents. Over the course of several months, checks had been written from this account to various elderly people in my neighborhood, the same people who had testified against me at my trial. But here was the crucial detail. The account had been opened, and the checks had been written before I had ever given Brenda any money. This proved that the scam had been planned long before she had approached me with her sob story about gambling debts. I had been the target from the very beginning. Armed with this new evidence, I went to the police station and asked to speak with Detective Rodriguez, the officer who had handled my case. He was reluctant to see me at first, but when I explained that I had new evidence of fraud, he agreed to meet with me. "Mrs. Mitchell," he said as I sat down in his office, "I hope you're not here to try to convince me that you were innocent. The evidence against you was overwhelming. Detective Rodriguez, I have proof that someone else opened a bank account using my name and forged my signature. The checks that were found in my house were written from this fraudulent account." I showed him the bank records, explaining how the signature was forged and how the timing proved that the scam had been planned in advance. Detective Rodriguez studied the documents carefully, but his expression remained skeptical. "Even if this account was opened fraudulently, that doesn't prove you didn't write these checks. You could have opened the account yourself using false information." "But why would I do that? Why would I use a fake address and forge my own signature?" "To create distance between yourself and the crimes. To make it harder to trace the money back to you." I felt my frustration growing. "Detective, I'm asking you to investigate this. Compare the handwriting on these documents to samples of my real signature. Check the security cameras from the bank. Do some actual detective work." Detective Rodriguez's expression hardened. "Mrs. Mitchell, you were convicted by a jury of your peers based on solid evidence. I'm not going to reopen a closed case based on some documents that could easily have been fabricated." "Fabricated? I got these directly from the bank." "You had 2 years in prison to plan this story. You could have had accomplices on the outside helping you create false evidence." I realized that Detective Rodriguez wasn't interested in the truth. He had closed my case and moved on, and he didn't want to admit that he might have made a mistake, but I wasn't giving up. I took my evidence to a private investigator named Tom Bradley, a former police officer who specialized in financial crimes. He was expensive, but I was willing to spend what little money I had left to clear my name. Tom reviewed the bank records and immediately saw what Detective Rodriguez had missed. "This is definitely fraud," he said. "The signature analysis alone would be enough to prove that someone else opened this account. But there's more." He showed me security camera footage from the bank that he had obtained through a contact in the industry. The footage showed a woman opening the account, but it wasn't me. It was someone wearing a wig and makeup to look like an older woman, but the body language and facial structure were all wrong. "This woman is probably in her 30s, Tom said. "She's wearing a disguise to make herself look older, but you can see her real age in the way she moves." The woman in the footage looked familiar, but I couldn't quite place her. Then Tom enhanced the image and I saw it clearly. It was Brenda. She had opened the fraudulent account herself, forging my signature and using a fake ID with my name on it. She had written the checks to her elderly victims, then planted them in my house to frame me for her crimes. "This is enough to prove your innocence," Tom said, "but it's also enough to send your daughter-in-law to prison for a very long time." I felt a surge of vindication and rage. After 2 years of being treated like a criminal, I finally had proof that I had been telling the truth all along. But I also felt something else, a cold, calculating desire for revenge. Brenda had destroyed my life, turned my son against me, and sent me to prison for crimes she had committed. She had stolen my money, my reputation, and 2 years of my freedom. Now it was time for her to pay. "What do you want to do with this evidence?" Tom asked. I thought about my options. I could take the evidence to the police and hope that they would reopen my case and arrest Brenda. I could take it to a lawyer and try to get my conviction overturned through the courts. Or I could confront Brenda myself and make her confess to what she had done. "I want to handle this personally," I told Tom. He looked concerned. "Mrs. Mitchell, I understand that you're angry, but you need to be careful. If you do anything illegal, you could end up back in prison." "I'm not going to do anything illegal," I assured him. "I'm just going to have a conversation with my daughter-in-law." But as I drove home that night, I knew I was lying. What I was planning wasn't just a conversation. It was justice. I read that letter until the paper started to feel soft at the edges. She has done this before. No, dear Dorothy. No, sincerely. Just those 5 words like a warning tapped on a window in the dark. Under the words was a name, Glenna Hart, and an address in a town 2 hours away. For a long time I just sat on my bunk holding the letter with both hands, afraid it might vanish if I blinked. Then I tucked it into my prison Bible. Not because I suddenly became a new person, but because no one searched a Bible too closely. That night, I didn't sleep. My mind kept turning over one question. Who sent it? I had no way to call the outside whenever I wanted. Phone time cost money, and I didn't have much. I also didn't know who to trust. In prison, even a kind face can be a trick. Still, I couldn't ignore the letter. It was the first crack in Brenda's wall. The next day I went to the library as soon as it opened. The librarian, Miss Klein, was an older woman with grey braids and eyes that missed nothing. She didn't ask questions about why I read law books. She just made sure I returned them on time. I sat at the small computer station reserved for legal work. We had limited access, but it was enough for certain things. Public records, old news articles, court listings. I typed in Glenna Hart. At first, nothing. Too many Hart names. Too many Glenna spellings. So I tried the address. A few local articles came up. A short piece about a community fundraiser. A photo of a woman standing beside a table of baked goods. Glenna Hart. She looked about my age. Kind face. The kind of face that trusts people. Then I searched. Glenna Hart fraud case. My breath caught. A headline from 5 years ago in that same town. Local woman accused of stealing from seniors. Case dismissed. The article was short. It said an older woman named Glenna Hart had been accused of taking jewellery and cash from elderly neighbours. It said there was confusing evidence. It said the charges were dropped due to lack of reliable witness statements. It didn't say who had made the report, but my hands started to shake anyway, because the pattern sounded familiar. Too familiar. I copied the article details into my notebook. Then I checked the names in the story. There was a mention of a younger relative by marriage who had been helping coordinate care visits around the neighbourhood. Relative by marriage. My stomach tightened. Brenda. I couldn't prove it yet, but the letter and the article together felt like a door opening a crack. I needed someone on the outside to help me. Someone who could check things I couldn't reach from inside. I hadn't spoken to Kevin in months. He never wrote. He never called. The silence was thick and painful like a wall. So I wrote him a letter anyway. I kept it simple because long letters are easy to ignore. Kevin, I got a message that Brenda has done this before. Please look up Glenna Hart in Eastbrook. Please, for once, don't listen to Brenda. Look at the facts. Mom. I mailed it and tried not to hope too hard. Hope can hurt in prison. Hope makes time feel slower. A week later, nothing. 2 weeks, nothing. Then, on a rainy Tuesday, the guard called out, "Mitchell, you've got a visitor." I stood up too fast. My chest tightened. Brenda. My first instinct was to say no, like always. But then I remembered the letter. Glenna Hart. The article. The crack in the wall. If Brenda still came every month, it meant she still needed to see me. She still needed to check that I was trapped, scared, and alone. That meant she was afraid of something. I looked at the guard and said, "Yes." The guard raised an eyebrow. "You sure?" I nodded. "I'm sure." My legs felt like jelly as they walked me to the visiting room. The room was bright with ugly lights and filled with small plastic tables. A guard watched from the corner like a statue. Brenda sat at a table near the window, hands folded neatly, wearing a pale pink sweater like she was going to a tea party. When she saw me, her eyes widened, just for a second. Then she smiled, the saint smile. "Oh, was Dorothy," she said softly. "I'm so glad you finally agreed." I sat down across from her and placed my hands on the table. I made myself look calm. I had practiced this in my head for nights. "Hello, Brenda," I said. Her face softened like she was stepping into a role. "How are you holding up? I've been so worried." I didn't answer. I leaned forward and said very quietly, "You know you can't keep this forever." Brenda blinked. "What do you mean?" I said, "someone remembers what you did before." Her smile froze. Just a tiny freeze, like a camera catching the truth for half a second. "I don't know what you're talking about," she whispered. I watched her closely. "Eastbrook, 5 years ago." Her eyes flicked to the guard, then back to me. "Dorothy, this isn't healthy. You're spiraling again." I almost laughed. She really thought she could still use the same words on me. I slid my hand into my pocket and pulled out my folded paper. Not the letter. I wasn't foolish enough to bring that out. Something else. A small note with only 2 words written in my neat print. Glenna Hart. I placed it on the table. Brenda stared at it like it burned. Then she leaned in and hissed, her sweet voice gone. "Who told you that?" There it was. Not, "What is that?" Not, "Who is she?" Who told you that? I felt my heart pound, but I kept my face calm. It doesn't matter who. What matters is this. I'm not alone anymore. Brenda's hands trembled slightly. She tucked them under the table. "Listen," she said quickly, the mask slipping. "You're in there for 2 years. 2 years, Dorothy. And when you get out, you'll still be a convicted thief. No one will believe you." "I don't need everyone," I said. "I just need one person with the right paperwork." Her eyes narrowed. "Kevin doesn't talk to you." "That will change," I said. Brenda's mouth tightened. She leaned back, then forced her face into the soft, caring look again, like she realized she had shown too much. "I brought you something," she said, pulling a small envelope from her purse. "Photos. From home. Kevin's been struggling. He misses you." I didn't touch the envelope. Instead, I said, "Tell me something, Brenda. Why do you keep coming here every month?" She blinked, playing innocent. "Because I care." "No," I said softly. "Because you're scared." Her cheeks flushed. "You're being cruel." I leaned forward again and lowered my voice so the guard couldn't hear. "You took 2 years of my life. You took my name. You took my son from me. But you made a mistake." Brenda swallowed. "You didn't kill my mind," I continued. "You gave me time, and I used it." Brenda's eyes glittered with anger. "You think you're clever now?" I said, "that you left tracks." She stared at me for a long moment, then her lips curled slightly. "You want a confession?" she whispered. "You'll never get it." Then she stood up, grabbed her purse, and put the saint smile back on like a coat. "I tried," she said loudly, for the guard's benefit. "I really tried. But she's still so angry." She turned and walked away without looking back. As the guard led me out, my knees felt weak again, but inside my chest, something was burning bright. Brenda was rattled. That meant Glenna Hart was real. It meant Brenda's past was a chain I could pull. Back in my cell, I opened my Bible and looked at the hidden letter again. Then I did the only thing I could do in prison. I wrote another letter, this time to Glenna Hart. I didn't know if it would reach her. I didn't know if she would answer. But I wrote anyway, slow and careful. "My name is Dorothy Mitchell. I believe we have the same enemy. Please, if you can, tell me what happened to you." I sealed it, and as I slid it into the outgoing mail slot, I felt a strange calm. Because for the first time since the handcuffs closed on my wrists, the story was no longer only Brenda's. It was becoming mine again. 22 hours later, I was sitting in my kitchen drinking coffee when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Kevin's number and my heart started racing. This was the moment I had been waiting for, dreading, and planning for all at the same time. "Mom?" Kevin's voice was shaky, barely recognizable. "Can you come over? Please? I need to see you." "Of course, sweetheart," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'll be right there." The drive to their house felt like the longest 20 minutes of my life. I had no idea what Brenda had told him or how much of the truth she had revealed. All I knew was that my son needed me, and for the first time in over 2 years he was asking for my help. When I arrived, Kevin was sitting on his front porch with his head in his hands. He looked like he had aged 10 years overnight. His hair was disheveled, his clothes were wrinkled, and his eyes were red from crying. "Kevin?" I said softly as I approached. He looked up at me, and the pain in his eyes was almost unbearable. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I'm so incredibly sorry." I sat down beside him on the porch steps, and he immediately collapsed against me, sobbing like a child. I held him the way I had when he was little and had scraped his knee or had a nightmare. "She told me everything," he said through his tears. "About the money, about the bank account, about framing you, all of it." "Where is she now?" "Gone. She packed a bag and left about an hour ago. Said she was turning herself into the police, but I don't know if I believe her." I pulled out my phone and called Detective Rodriguez. When he answered, I could hear the skepticism in his voice. "Mrs. Mitchell, what can I do for you?" "Detective, I need to know if Brenda Rodriguez has turned herself in yet." "Turned herself in for what?" "For framing me. For the crimes I was convicted of 2 years ago." There was a long pause. "Mrs. Mitchell, we've been through this. Your case is closed. Check your desk, Detective. I think you'll find that Brenda left you a very interesting confession." Another pause, then I heard papers rustling. "Hold on," Detective Rodriguez said, and I could hear him talking to someone else in the background. After a few minutes, he came back on the line. His tone was completely different now. "Mrs. Mitchell, I think you and I need to have a conversation. Can you come down to the station? I'll be there in an hour." I hung up and turned back to Kevin. "She did turn herself in. She left a confession at the police station." Kevin wiped his eyes and looked at me with a mixture of relief and shame. "Mom, how can you ever forgive me? I believed her over you. I let you go to prison for something you didn't do." "You believed the evidence," I said gently. "The evidence she manufactured to make me look guilty. You're not the first person to be fooled by a professional con artist." "But you're my mother. I should have known you could never do those things." I took his hands in mine. "Kevin, what matters now is that the truth is finally coming out. We can't change what happened, but we can move forward from here." "I don't know how to move forward from this. My wife is a criminal. My mother spent 2 years in prison because of her. How do I live with that?" "One day at a time," I said. "The same way I lived through prison, one day at a time." At the police station, Detective Rodriguez looked uncomfortable as he reviewed Brenda's written confession. It was a detailed account of everything she had done. The forged bank account, the planted evidence, the systematic theft from Kevin, and her history of similar crimes in other cities. "Mrs. Mitchell," he said finally, "I owe you an apology. We should have investigated this case more thoroughly. What happens now? We'll start the process of overturning your conviction. With this confession and the additional evidence you've provided, it should be straightforward. We're also issuing a warrant for Mrs. Rodriguez's arrest." "She's already here," I said. "She turned herself in this morning." Detective Rodriguez nodded. "She's being processed now. She'll be charged with fraud, perjury, theft, and conspiracy. Given her confession and the evidence against her, she's looking at significant prison time." "What about restitution?" "She stole over $50,000 from me, plus the money I had to pay in legal fees and fines." "That will be part of the criminal case. You'll also be able to pursue civil damages." As we finished the paperwork, Detective Rodriguez asked me something that surprised me. "Mrs. Mitchell, how did you figure all this out? The investigation you conducted was more thorough than what we did originally." I thought about Carmen, my cellmate who had taught me how to think like a criminal. I thought about the long hours in the prison library, learning about financial fraud and investigation techniques. I thought about the cold determination that had sustained me through 2 years of planning. Prison is an excellent education, I said simply. 3 weeks later, I stood in the same courtroom where I had been convicted, watching as the judge officially overturned my conviction and declared me innocent of all charges. Kevin sat beside me, holding my hand and crying tears of relief. Brenda was sentenced to 8 years in prison for her crimes. As they led her away in handcuffs, she looked at me one last time. There was no defiance in her eyes now, no manipulation or fake tears, just the hollow look of someone who had finally been caught. "I'm sorry," she mouthed silently. I didn't respond. Sorry wasn't enough to give me back 2 years of my life, but it was a start. The media coverage of my exoneration was extensive. The story of the grandmother who had been framed by her daughter-in-law and then solved her own case from prison captured public attention. I received hundreds of letters from people expressing support and admiration. But the letter that meant the most to me came from Carmen, my former cellmate. "I always knew you'd get that bitch," she wrote. "You're tougher than you look, Dorothy Mitchell. Don't ever let anyone underestimate you again." Kevin and I began the slow process of rebuilding our relationship. He moved back into his old apartment and filed for divorce from Brenda. The house they had bought with stolen money was sold, and the proceeds were used to pay restitution to Brenda's victims. "I want to make this right," Kevin told me one evening as we sat in my kitchen, sharing dinner like we used to do. "I want to pay back every penny she stole from you." "The money doesn't matter," I said. "What matters is that we're together again." But Kevin insisted on making financial amends. He took a second job and worked overtime to pay back the $50,000 Brenda had stolen from me. It took him 3 years, but he paid back every cent with interest. More importantly, he paid back something that was worth far more than money: his trust and respect. I also used my experience to help other people who had been victims of similar crimes. I worked with legal aid organizations to help elderly people who had been scammed, and I testified before the state legislature about the need for better protections for vulnerable adults. The house that had felt so cold and empty when I first returned from prison gradually became warm and welcoming again. Kevin came for dinner every Sunday just like he used to do. We talked about everything: his work, my volunteer activities, and, slowly, carefully, about what we had both learned from our ordeal. "I'll never trust anyone that easily again," Kevin said one evening. "That's not necessarily a bad thing," I replied, "but don't let what happened make you cynical about everyone. There are still good people in the world. Like you," he said. "You could have given up in prison. You could have accepted what happened and just served your time quietly. But you fought back." "I fought back because I had something worth fighting for," I said. "I had a son who needed to know the truth about his mother." 5 years after my release from prison, I received an unexpected visitor. Tom Bradley, the private investigator who had helped me gather evidence against Brenda, came to my house with news. "Brenda's been running cons from prison," he said. "She's been writing letters to elderly men, claiming to be a wrongfully convicted woman who needs money for legal fees." I wasn't surprised. People like Brenda don't change even when they're locked up. "The good news is that the prison authorities caught on to her scheme," Tom continued. "She's been moved to solitary confinement and lost all her privileges. She won't be eligible for parole for at least 6 more years." "Good," I said simply. That evening, as I sat on my back porch watching the sunset, I reflected on everything that had happened. I had lost 2 years of my life, my reputation, and my relationship with my son. But I had also gained something valuable: the knowledge that I was stronger than I had ever imagined. Brenda had tried to destroy me, but instead, she had revealed a strength and determination I didn't know I possessed. She had underestimated the power of a mother's love and an innocent person's determination to clear their name. Most importantly, she had underestimated me. I was no longer the naive, trusting woman who had handed over $50,000 to a crying daughter-in-law. I was someone who had survived prison, solved her own case, and brought a criminal to justice. I was Dorothy Mitchell, and I was nobody's victim. As the sun set behind the trees, I smiled and went inside to start dinner. Kevin would be coming over soon and I wanted everything to be perfect. After all, we had a lot to celebrate. And if you like this video, subscribe and comment. Your voice matters.